Okay, I'm going to speak about matzah for a few minutes. As I'm starting, Rabbi Eisenbach is going to be giving out some samples. The things that he's giving out are, you'll hear, just about every one of them is not kosher as matzah. And the bakery where we got them from actually made sure to cross out their hefsher on it before they gave me the box. In order to create a matzah, a person needs to mix flour and water together and cook them, bake them. That's how you make matzah. And we have a sort of a paradox, which is, we all know that if flour and water sit together for 18 minutes, they become chametz. But there's something else that can create chametz, which is if the flour and the water are, instead of being hot, they're kept warm, then they will become chametz in much faster than 18 minutes. On the opposite extreme is, if in order to make the matzah, you do have to make them hot. So in baking a matzah, we're balancing these two things, which is we need to make it hot enough to bake, but if we just make it warm, then instead of making matzah, we're going to create chametz, which of course that's what we're not trying to do. As an example of this, when a person wants to bake bread at home, you take the yeast, you don't put the yeast right into the bread. You take the yeast first and it sits in warm water. That gets the yeast going. When you finish making your batter, you put it in a warm area to rise. Those things help chametz. As opposed to when we make matzah, we're careful to use something called mayim shalanu, which is water that's been sitting for a while so it cooled off, it's not too warm. We make sure that the area where they're doing the baking in is not too hot, because warmth is, so to speak, the enemy. Warmth will cause the thing to become chametz in less than 18 minutes and will ruin our matzah. So those are standard things we take care of. A person takes care of when they're baking matzah. But one thing that can happen that's a little bit out of the control of the setup of the bakery is that during the making of the matzahs or putting them in and out of the oven, there are ways that the matzah can get shielded from the heat. That is to say, the oven is very hot, 800 degrees, 1,000 degrees, it's very hot, but there are things that can happen that will shield the matzah from the heat of the oven, and if that happens, the matzah will be warm, but will not be hot. And again, if it'll be warm and not hot, it can become chametz instead of becoming baked. And what we're talking about is two different things. We're going to talk about each of those for a minute. What Rabbi Eisenbach is passing out is what we call a kefulah. A Matzah Kefulah means a matzah that's folded. I don't know if every one of you got one that's actually folded, but just about all those are. These are most of the ones that you should see here are different kinds of folded matzahs. We didn't collect them. We were at a bakery and they had collected them for us, a matzah bakery. And what happens is that if the matzah folds while it's being usually put into the oven, that matzah, what will happen is the one part of the matzah will cover over the other, shielding or protecting the underside from getting baked, and the inside will not get baked as well. So we say we're concerned that maybe that the area which was folded over became chametz, and therefore that matzah cannot be eaten on Pesach. Not only that, but if you find one, you're supposed to break off about an inch all around the place where it's folded and throw that out. Preferably, that should be done before Pesach. And therefore, of course, in any reputable matzah bakery, there's someone whose job it is to look for these kind of kefulahs. Someone stands there and checks every matzah that passes by. Someone just stands there and pulls out the ones that are folded. But, they're only human. So many people will check their matzahs before Pesach to make sure that they, in fact, have no kefulahs in there. You go through them. The guy in the bakery is looking at thousands of matzahs, and you have 20 matzahs in your house or 50 matzahs, and the people go through them to make sure that they don't have any of these folded areas places where the matzah might be protected. One thing, I don't think that I found any samples of that in here, so I'm sorry. I wish I could show it to you. There are some matzahs that when they get folded, the ones that you should have, you could see it's a clear folded over area where the underside is not getting baked. There are some where, when you look at it, it's smooth and flat. But you could see some kind of a crease. You could see that somehow the matzah did get folded, but it doesn't show any signs that when you look at it, you don't see like any folded over area. It just seems to be basically flat, but you could tell that something went on over there. Somehow it got folded. Okay, and what I've been told is by more than one person is that what that means is those are matzahs that got folded during the rolling of the matzah, not in the oven, and really those matzahs, most people consider them not to be kefulas. Those matzahs are not really kefulas. However, most people will not eat them. Okay, so what typical is that in some bakers they'll even let it go by, they'll let it be sold, as Kashrus and Pesach, but most people when they see that would take that off and throw that out. Okay, that's one kind, which is a Matzah Kefulah. That's what most of you have. There's something else called a Matzah Nefuchah, where that's a matzah where it bubbled up. Instead of being flat, it's bubbled up. And that's in that, this is something that we call, I don't believe any of you have that. And a Matzah Nefuchah is most, in the early poskim who talk about this idea of a Matzah Nefuchah say, they ask the following question. If you look at a matzah, 100 matzahs went through the oven, and they all came out flat and crunchy and the way they're supposed to. And all of a sudden, one of them has got this bubble in it. Something's wrong with, something doesn't look right with this matzah. It makes us suspect that something wasn't done right with this matzah. Maybe it sat for too long, it got too warm, something must have gone wrong. Why does this one have the bubble? Why does this one seem to have blown up? Which makes us think that it's like becoming chametz. When things become chametz, they start to rise and they start to bubble up. Why does it look like that? So therefore they say, it's a sign that something's wrong with this matzah, and you have to throw out the entire matzah. The entire matzah is not kosher because something's wrong with this matzah. Do you think you have it? Okay, so we'll look at it afterwards. Now, I'm going to describe to you in a minute what it means to say when the matzah is in the nefuchah. I haven't yet really explained to you what that means. But the truth is that the later poskim say that nowadays it's very rare to have a matzah that's in nefuchah. It's very rare to have one. And there are three reasons why that is. One is because our matzahs are much thinner than they used to be. Even the Sephardim who make matzahs nowadays make a little thicker, like a pita matzah, but the Gemara says you can make a matzah up to like this thick. Okay, so they used to have very different matzahs than we do. We have the Ashkenazi minhag is to only eat very thin matzahs, the thin, crunchy matzahs that you have. So one reason is in the very thin matzahs, it's unlikely to have a nefuchah. The second is our ovens are much hotter than they used to be way back. And then there's a third reason. We'll hold the third reason for 1 second, and to tell you that therefore most poskim say nowadays, we're not concerned that something was done wrong with a matzah. When we see one that has bubbles, and that doesn't tell us something was wrong, but it does make us be concerned that the place where there was a bubble formed, maybe that the bubble, the top of the bubble is protecting the bottom part. Imagine if this is the bottom and it bubbled up like over here like this, then this top card that's over here is protecting the bottom card from the heat of the oven. So the bottom layer of the matzah was not getting baked, and it's very similar to a kefulah. And therefore nowadays, if we have a matzah that's in the nefuchah, we treat it like a kefulah. We break off that area and about an inch around it, but we don't throw out the whole matzah. In the olden days, that's what they used to do. And the third factor, which is very relevant over here, is that one of the things that causes matzahs to become nefuchah nowadays is, let's start the other way. What prevents matzahs from bubbling up is when they make holes in the matzahs. Okay, every matzah that you've ever seen has holes in it. There's a machine, it goes by a Yiddish name, it's called a reddler. Okay, it makes holes in the matzahs. And when you make holes in a matzah, you won't get, if you make the holes correctly, you don't get any nefuchas. You won't find any nefuchas in a matzah. If the person who does the pressing, making those holes, doesn't press the thing hard enough, and in one area he doesn't make a hole all the way through, it only gets through partially, it doesn't get all the way through like it's supposed to, that area will become a nefuchah. Okay? And so a real nefuchah is not a matzah that just rose up a little bit. A matzah that just has like a little, what we call like a hill in it, that's fine, because the heat penetrates it, there's no problem. A nefuchah means when the matzah forms a bubble. That is to say, the top and the bottom layers separate from each other, so that we have to be concerned that the top layer is protecting, the top of the bubble is protecting the bottom. Okay? And the reason why most consumers will never see it is because when that matzah comes out of the oven, the bubble pops pretty quickly. Okay? It's pretty hard to catch it for a consumer to see it when it gets home. Within a short time after leaving the oven, it pops. and you won't see it. What you will see is, I have one sample there in the bag. What you will see is the area that was popped, the place where it was protected is not as well baked as the rest of the matzahs. Okay? And you can see that, and when you see it in a finished matzah, it's not so easy to tell. We saw it in matzahs that had just come out of the oven, and you could feel that it's softer and not as well baked as the rest of the matzahs. Okay, so that bubble protects it. Most consumers would never see it because the bubble pops. By the time you get it, the bubble will have popped, but you might notice something seems wrong about it. I have one over there like that. Okay, and one last part about this nefuchah is that in order to be considered a nefuchah, the amount that bubbled up, it has to bubble up about 3/4 of an inch high. Okay, and it can't be just a little bit of rose up. It has to be a nice sized piece, thing that rose up to the point that we should be concerned that it protected the matzah. And that is it. If you have any questions, we'll